Yes, sir.
Item new business. Well,
Certainly.
you saw the email. No. So one new business, I just. And then mowing the right away.
I guess I was expecting the city manager to come back with a recommendation of.
So he came back to me and said.
Clear it up. Okay, well, we can direct them to bring us something.
Okay.
I think, I don't know that we want to make the sausage.
It's not a big deal.
Yeah,
Because if it's city right.
right.
Then I don't think we have an issue.
Gotcha. Well, it's hard to leave. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the city council meeting for Thursday, May 18. Before we call the meeting to order, anyone who plans to speak to council this evening, I would invite you to sign in on our sign-up sheet. And we have people that are on our agenda that we'll be hearing from shortly. You don't need to. But at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And our first item of business, I would ask for everyone to please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. And again, elated that you're here for especially on such a beautiful night when it would be more fun to be outdoors. Did want to make note that Councilman Smith is out of town due to family emergency, and we hope that he has safe travels and all is well with their family. And Mr. Ziegler's tardy. He was at the high school waiting for his daughter's award, but he will be joining us shortly after supporting his daughter at the high school this evening. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the agenda. And I would like to, let's see here, under 15.1, under new business, we will strike that, the consideration of approval of an agreement specifying terms to establish a regional human services center. We don't have the, or did not have the proper publication notification on that. And so that will go to June 1st. But if you do have any questions or concerns or comments regarding that agreement, and invite the public, if you have chance to look at that agreement and have questions, please direct those to the city manager. And we will anticipate taking up that business on June 1st at our next meeting. And under 11 point boards and commissions, and we'll add 11.18 for a housing report from council members Nick Betts and Marilyn Alexander from their trip to Richmond this past Friday. And also, if we could add under new business, a new 15.1, and that's flowers in the city, discussion to be led by Councilman Alligood regarding flowers and mowing. And with those adjustments, is there anything else from council? Leslie, you seem so far away and lonely down there, but we really appreciate you. Being no other changes or modifications, with those modifications, we will approve the agenda. And we will move directly into proclamations. And I will invite the appropriate people to join me in the front. Chief Dickerson for a proclamation expressing appreciation to the Lexington Fire Department and local emergency medical service. Thank you, sir. I'll invite all of y'all to come and stand behind me so the public can see your smiling faces. and we thank you for being with us this evening, but more importantly, the proclamation expressing our appreciation from the mayor and city council for the Lexington Fire Department and local emergency medical services agencies and providers. Whereas the men and women of the City of Lexington Fire Department and all EMS agencies serving the City of Lexington, Rockbridge County, and the City of Buena Vista provide a vital public service by responding to the EMS needs of our residents and visitors. And whereas members of emergency medical service teams are ready to provide life-saving care to those who need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury. And whereas emergency medical services has grown to fill a gap by providing important out-of-hospital care, including preventive medicine, follow-up care, and access to telemedicine. And whereas the emergency medical services system consists of first responders, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, emergency medical dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, educators, administrators, pre-hospital nurses, emergency physicians, trained members of the public, and other out-of-hospital medical care providers. And whereas the members of emergency medical service teams, whether career or volunteer, engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and the accomplishments of emergency medical providers by designated Emergency Medical Services Week. Now, therefore, we, the mayor and Lexington City Council, call upon all citizens of Lexington to observe the week of May 21 through 27, 2023 as Emergency Medical Services Week, during which all of our residents may join in celebrating the dedication of our local EMS providers, past and present, and especially their families, whose support allows them to serve our community. Adopted this 18th day of May, 2023. Chief, thank you on behalf of a grateful city for a fantastic staff and crew that takes care of our community. Thank you, sir. And as it wasn't read from the actual certificate, I'll reread that. But share this with you and please display it in a prominent place. And to all of you, thank you for being with us and for your service to our community. Chief, you want to share a few words?
C shift working today since 7 o'clock this morning. They're 10 calls deep, serving the citizens of Lexington and Rockbridge County. 3 calls simultaneously, all EMS calls earlier this morning, and we're able to answer all of them. Fantastic. Thank you for your support.
C for cool.
That's right.
All right, the cool crew. All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
We'd also like to share a proclamation for the National Public Works Week. And I'm not aware, is Patrick here? I will read this in recognition of the folks that take care of things, seen and unseen, and make our community a better place. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities, and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the people of City of Lexington. And whereas these infrastructure facilities and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals who are engineers, managers, and employees at all levels of government and the private sector, who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's transportation, water supply, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our citizens. Whereas it is in the public interest for the citizens, civic leaders, and children in the City of Lexington to gain knowledge of and to maintain an ongoing interest and understanding of the importance of public works and the public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas the year 2023 marks the 63rd annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association, Canadian Public Works Association. Be it now Therefore, it is resolved that I, Frank Friedman, as mayor of the city of Lexington, do hereby designate the week May 21 through 27, 2023 as National Public Works Week. I urge all citizens to join with representatives of the American Public Works Association and government agencies in activities, events, and ceremonies designed to pay tribute to our public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees, and to recognize the substantial contributions they make to protecting our national health and safety and quality of life. And again, these folks do it day in and day out. We didn't have much snow this year, but think about when we get 2 or 3 feet dumped downtown, they come and clean it up and make it passable. Our trash goes quietly in the night, typically. And those are just a couple of things that they do. Repairing sidewalks, I could go on and on, but you get the point. When you see the team in their new uniforms and the white city trucks, make a point to say hello and thank them for the work that they do. And with that, thank you for the enthusiastic response. Next item on our agenda is presentations, and I would like to invite Share the Air presentation, the Rockbridge County High School Y Street team. I'm not sure who's going first, but Rachel, if you're making introductions, welcome. Thank you for making the trek from Arlington and being with us here in Lexington.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Thank you so much for allowing us to come present to you today. I represent the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth, and I have with me our Y Street members from Rockbridge County High School. We have Malia, Evan, and Jackson, and Malia is going to kick us off and talk about the Share the Air initiative.
Y Street is the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth's award-winning volunteer statewide youth initiative. Y Street encourages high school students across Virginia to make their communities healthier by reducing tobacco use and promoting obesity prevention efforts. Y Street partners with high schools across the Commonwealth to train youth on how to be strong advocates. Share the Air's primary goal to create 100% tobacco-free and e-cigarette-free outdoor public spaces such as parklands, playgrounds, and trails. City leaders can lead the charge in establishing tobacco-free and vapor-free outdoor recreational areas through voluntary policy adoption and codifying this policy through county ordinance or city ordinance. We hope that you will consider adopting the tobacco and e-cigarette-free policy for Lexington and will partner with Share the Air to do so.
Hello, everyone. So some information about our current partners. We know that there is a public interest in and around this issue, and that localities and park authorities can adopt a voluntary tobacco-free and e-cigarette-free outdoor policy. The campaign currently has 14 partner members around Virginia that have already taken steps to creating 100% tobacco-free and e-cigarette-free outdoor public spaces. Therefore, others can too. Our 5 previous partner localities are the town of Shenandoah, Colonial Beach, Hopewell, town of Stanley, and King George County. Share the Air's new 9 newer partner localities are the towns of Alberta, Ashland, and Winchester, as well as the counties of Fauquier, Chesterfield, New Kent, Franklin, and Powhatan, and Hanover. Also, following the VRPS conference, Share the Air has been in conversations with park departments and local governments across the state who are interested in learning more about possibly becoming the campaign's newest partner. We wanted to share some local data with you all, that there is support for Share the Air in Lexington. 88% of Virginians surveyed in and around the Lexington area agree that parks and playgrounds should be tobacco-free and e-cigarette-free. 84% of those in and around the Lexington areas also stated that they would support legislation that would give local control back to local governments, allowing them to pass stronger tobacco-free policies. 90% of those in and around the Lexington area also believe cigarette butts and e-cigarette liquids and vape cartridges can damage the environment. So the policy is completely voluntary if we were to implement it. So there will be signage up and it will recommend that we abstain from vaping and smoking in outdoor public areas. But because it's a voluntary policy, there can be no legal action taken if one does participate in smoking or vaping. So I personally support this campaign because I myself am a runner here in Lexington. I run cross country and track and field. And I also like to run with my sister. And I frequent trails like the Chessie Trail, the Woods Creek Trail. And I would absolutely love to not have to worry about coming across secondhand smoke when on these runs with my younger sibling. And so that is why I support the campaign.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jackson.
Hey,
My parents
Jackson,
work-
being a tall guy, pull that microphone up
Sorry.
so we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
My parents work for the National Park Service, so naturally I've been surrounded by the outdoors my whole life. As I've gotten older, I've enjoyed recreation more and more, hiking, camping, etc. So I support Share the Air so I and many others can enjoy their time outdoors smoke-free.
My family and I are all athletes, including me and my siblings, but we all have, not all, but some of us have some illnesses that we deal with. I have asthma. My brother has sickle cell, and that makes it really easy for him to catch diseases. And so those can be like with tobacco and e-cigarette usage, the chances for us to be outside and pick up anything that can be put into the environment is like very easy. And for me, I know with asthma and playing soccer, I have smoke-induced asthma, so it makes it really bad on my lungs if I'm outside and I breathe in smoke, secondhand smoke, etc.
So if that wasn't convincing enough, here's some more reasons why we should go tobacco-free. Tobacco products account for almost 40% of all littered items in the nation, making them the most littered item in the United States. Maintenance to clear up litter can be costly. The Virginia Department of Transportation reported spending $3.5 million per year just to pick up roadside litter in the state of Virginia. Additionally, discarded tobacco products can often lead to potential disasters like wildfires. Nearly 85% of wildland fires in the United States are caused by humans, with discarded tobacco products being a continuing reason. According to the National Fire Center, at least 3 wildland fires in the last 3 years in Virginia were started by cigarettes. Specifically, in 2020, there was over 53,000 human-caused fires in the United States, with tobacco products being a contributing factor. Also, a 2020 fire in Fairfax County caused by discarded smoking materials caused over $48 million in damages.
The Share the Air campaign is here to serve as a resource to make this process as easy as possible for you all. Once you adopt our voluntary tobacco-free and e-cigarette-free outdoor policy and sign our commitment form, we provide free signage that you can post in designated areas. We also provide a free toolkit, which includes our model policy, checklist, and implementation and community resources, all in one place for you to use. We further help with positive media news attention, and we can help promote our tobacco-free policy on the Share the Air website and social media channels. We want to publicly promote and celebrate your decision to go tobacco-free and vapor-free and make sure you get the recognition you deserve for promoting clean and healthy outdoor environments. Sorry. Thank you all for allowing us to share with you about our 100% tobacco-free and e-cigarette-free outdoor spaces. Do you have any questions for us?
Thank you for the great presentation. Members of council, do you have any questions for the team?
How long has your program been in place? When did it start?
2019,
2019.
in your packet, there should be a survey data report that has some of our data from the survey.
And could you display for all of council to see the sign that you have?
Signs that will be provided to you at no cost, at least 10 of them, and they're aluminum. I don't know. If you want to
Yeah. Just want to get a good look at it. Very good.
like Evan and Jackson mentioned, the voluntary policy, we understand that Virginia is a bill in the state, and we're just asking that the council consider adopting a voluntary tobacco and vapor free policy.
Very good. Thank you all. Would it be appropriate for us to consider a motion or direct the city manager to embrace the actual? Mr. Ziegler?
Well, as I understand it, you had met previously with the city manager, right? And when you met with the city manager, did you talk about the fact that we already have some smoke-free parks? We already have signage? And because we did that back in 2016, 2017, I believe. And so are those, is there any enforcement at Kids Place and so on? Because that was a big issue when we did that 6 years ago, that we posted that. So I'm not sure. And of course, our schools are tobacco free.
Yes, I don't believe public parks or public places, spaces, which is part of their presentation, can be
Okay.
made to be tobacco free. It's a
Okay.
voluntary policy as
I just wouldn't, we already have signs at Kids Place, for a fact. I know that. I don't think we have them maybe at some of our other parks, but at Kids Place we do, because we actually had a real problem with people smoking and cigarette butts being in that whole area inside the playground. So we posted signs at each entrance some time ago. And so I just wouldn't want to layer on, have a duplication of efforts. Because that's one of the highest, utilized parks in our area where kids are the most.
But I do like their sign actually better because I don't think ours addressed vaping.
No, I agree.
I'm not even sure it had dipping. But you're right. We did do that because we feel strongly the same way, especially in parks, that they should be smoke free. And I appreciate the effort. And I'd be interested in your recommendations if you have specific places. I know you're saying parks and playgrounds, or if anywhere else in the city. Be happy to hear that either now or if you want to leave that with the city manager.
Yeah, so we were thinking like maybe Jordan's Point, there's the Waddell Playground, and also our trails such as the Chessie Trail and the Woods Creek Trail. Just some common outdoor areas that we have.
I think to sign the agreement, I would welcome council, and maybe that was a form of a motion that you're making, Ms. Straw, not to put words in your mouth, of support of this. But I think that's, I believe, what you're looking for, and then implementation would be up to Public Works that we recognized earlier for their good deeds and helping out with things such as this.
Yes, so I move that we accept the signs and suggestions from the Rockbridge County High School Y Street team. Appreciate their work.
A second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I like the signs.
Yeah.
Very, very appealing, eye catching.
Excellent presentation.
But before we take the vote, I just want to point out some of the details that you mentioned of people dispensing of cigarette butts. An item that's now permanently on or currently on our agenda is dealing with a building facility at 201 North Randolph Street that caught fire from someone who was late night smoking, dropped a butt, and burned the building down. So this is something that's very much common sense, responsible, and I'm sure is widely supported in our community. Yes, sir.
There is a proposed agreement by the organization. I think if the city wants to go forward with executing this, and it does establish a voluntary compliance program, and I think you would need the motion to include execution of the agreement as well.
Okay.
Does this, and I'm skimming it while we're talking, does this identify any areas where the signs, does that leave up to the city to decide where to post the signs? Wanted to make sure of that. Sorry.
Friendly or amendment to include the execution of the agreement with Share the Air?
I have to admit, the agreement wasn't in our packet, was it?
No, it's in the package you just received.
Okay, could you maybe read it out loud? I hate to vote on anything I haven't read. Thank you.
It says Lexington is committed to providing 100% tobacco-free and vape-free parklands park facilities, and open public spaces in order to provide a clean, healthy, safe environment for all Virginians. Signing this letter is self-enforcing and voluntary. No tobacco use or electronic device, is allowed on public-owned parklands, park facilities, and open public spaces. And then there's 6 bullets establishing voluntary compliance to prohibit tobacco and electronic smoking device use on parklands, open public spaces, including common areas, playgrounds, and shelters. Enforce the voluntary policy when violations occur, but that's just, we haven't had anyone that's had to do that at all. If a person continues to violate the voluntary compliance, a park employee can inform that the violation is a nuisance, but again, that's just can inform, it's not required whatsoever. Park staff will be informed of the voluntary policy, post signage in a manner and location that's adequately informs the community of the tobacco and e-cigarette policy, and advertise and promote the policy on the website.
Very good. With the keen eye of counsel and our counsel, any heartburn?
About heartburn, I don't need to weigh in on the policy issue necessarily, but it does say 100% smoke-free and vape-free on all parks and parklands. So I think it would apply, and then it does have an enforcement discussion in here. I know enforcement is suggestive, but it does address enforcement. And I think those are the 2 biggest things offered there.
Would you have any concern that it says, if a person continues to violate voluntary compliance, an owner, manager, or park employee can inform that person of violation constitutes a nuisance?
To the extent it is voluntary and there's any enforcement, and I think that causes me, a little bit of concern, but I think if telling them it's a nuisance is as simple as, hey, it's a voluntary smoke-free zone, we'd like you not to do it, I think that would be that would cause me a concern. But to the extent, and I know kind of what you're getting at, Nick, is nuisance can have some legal connotation to it as far as if there's a nuisance, a legal nuisance, then a municipality has an obligation. To make it. So I see your concern. But I don't think that is intended. I think.
Ms. Strong, did you want to add to your motion? Perhaps
Sure.
Satisfactory review of it by our attorney. We can execute it subject to.
I would like to add that wording to it. I think that would be
So
sufficient.
We'll fully review it, not under on the fly here. And if satisfactory with our attorneys, one on council and one representing council, work to execute. So do you accept that friendly amendment? Yes, very good, very good. Any further discussion? It asks for a roll call vote. Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler. Aye. Ms. Strong.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Malaya, Jackson, Evan, thank you for being here and for bringing this forward. And congratulations on witnessing sausage being made. Nothing's as easy as it looks when it comes to governing. So I'm sure you've studied a little of this in your government class. Who do you have for government? Mr. Gallagher. So let him know what you witnessed here tonight, and invite him to come see what we do here sometime. But thank you all for your contributions to our community and here tonight, and best of luck with your pending closure of school here in the next week.
Thank you.
Rachel, thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say you are more than welcome to stay the remainder of our meeting and see more sausage made. But if you have homework or other obligations, Sweet Things is open for a little while later, I think. So can check those out. Next item on the agenda is fiscal year 2023 third quarter financial report. Jen Bell, come dazzle us.
I think I just got called sausage, though. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. The FY23 third quarter financials show healthy growth for the city of Lexington, and we are anticipating a surplus at year end. The city manager and I are working on a more thorough projection of what that surplus will look like that we'll be sharing with council in the near future. Taking a brief look at our revenues, as we've discussed in several previous meetings, the category other local taxes continues to be an area where we are seeing collections much higher than budgeted. And the same with use of money and property, the section where our interest earnings show up. And so quickly, I'll come back to general fund revenues, but quickly to take a look at the projections on those 4 categories. After some good input from David Sigler, we took a look and sharpened our pencils a bit on what the 4th quarter might look like in these 4 categories. So here you'll see the FY23 budget, our year-to-date collections through the end of March, and then the 4th quarter projection. And rather than using the conservative estimate of just meeting budget as we have been doing, I took a look at the 4th quarter of last year and took an average of those 3 months and projected that out to be our 4th quarter receipts. So then you'll see our projected totals and our projected excess. And clearly that's a large number, nearly $1.8 million we're looking at. Just go back to the other revenues. Building permits are another category that's well ahead of budget, thanks to several large construction projects in the city, including improvements at the hospital and WNL. Recovered costs, you'll see we've only collected $226. There's no need for concern, however. That's the category where we receive most of our collections at year end, being the fire and rescue payment and some debt service payments. Our annual ARPA report was filed, it was due April 30th, so it was filed in the month of April. And we will be able to recognize just over $3 million in ARPA revenue this year. And you'll see that at the end of the year. I'll do an adjusting entry for that. Looking at expenses. Overall, they're slightly lower than we might expect through the end of the 3rd quarter. And looking at those, you may see leisure services at 86%, and on the surface that appears high, but this category includes discretionary and non-discretionary agency payments. And while most of those are paid in 4 quarterly installments, there are a handful that are paid in full at the beginning of the year. And then the horse center is actually paid in January and July. So that's been fully paid, even though we're not through year end. And just a note on the horse center, because we have seen such increased collections on the lodging taxes, we will owe them a true-up payment after the end of the year, which right now it looks like it should be around $62,000. Any questions on general fund?
One question, and maybe I'm just misreading it, but under public safety, our budget was 5.2 and we've realized 3.5.
Yes.
So we're on target to reach the 5.2. Okay. Last year's expenses at 3.3. I'm just curious what the substantial difference is.
I can go back and I'll be able to tell you specifically off the top of my head. I think part of it would be attributed to salary increases over last year, as well as the incentive program put in place at the fire department.
Okay.
But I'll get more detail and come back to you.
Thank you.
Other questions on general fund? Okay, the school fund is also in good shape with revenue at 74% of the budget and well ahead of year-to-date expenses. And like the city, the schools are projecting a surplus at year end. The utility fund, revenues in the utility fund are adequate to meet our operational expenses. But as you likely noticed in the packet that Janie sent around last week, we are missing budget on the revenue side by about 10% from where we should be at this point in the year. So it's just another area where we need to continue to analyze and just get a better handle on that. In our equipment replacement fund, we've received all of the equipment we were scheduled to buy this year, except for the trash truck, which has been delayed and should arrive in October. And then 2 pieces of equipment that it was decided we could actually hold off on replacing them this year. So we've deferred those to future years.
Can I ask a question on the utility fund?
Sure.
What is the there's 221% received other revenues?
One moment.
I was just wondering what the other revenues were. I'm sorry. What I was saying was on the utility fund revenues, under other revenues, there's a 221% received in 2023 funding. I was trying to figure out what that other revenue source was.
I apologize. Just one moment
Okay.
longer. Okay, that encompasses our non-operating revenue, which doesn't specifically clarify for us. So I'll come back to you on that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim, while we're looking at the utility fund revenues, let me make sure I understood correctly. We're running behind about 10% budget for regular operational.
Right, just the water and sewer billings that we have is the part that's running about 10% behind what we had budgeted.
And any expectation that you would recommend increasing the rate on the short term, or how do we bridge that gap, or is there a plan to bridge that gap? Which is probably more of a Patrick question, but.
And I will follow up with perhaps the city manager and Patrick on that.
I would suggest for the current fiscal year, there's really no remedy. We can make we can cover our expenses. Putting a different rate in place for the next month and a half or 2 of the year, I don't know that solves anything. We did get a little more aggressive in the rates for the FY24 year, hoping we'd come closer to our estimates on the revenue side. One thing as conversation took place, occurred to me, we need to look at the write-offs. If you recall, a couple of years ago, we authorized that if you had a leak under your house or a toilet was leaking and you had to spend an extra $400 for the leak, that we would write off half of that. I get a lot of those. So I'm not sure what that number is, but I guess I need to do some research and find out what it's costing us. Just FYI.
Could be close to that 10%.
Could it possibly also be a collection issue, just collecting on the lakes?
On the regular rates, no, because we have, a policy where we do obviously shut people off if necessary, but we shut off very few a month, really. And those we do shut off, the vast majority of them come in the next day and pay their bill.
2 questions. Could the additional revenue be paying for larger meters? Is that
Thank you.
VMI,
Yes.
the pool came online, the meter setup charges are significant for that size of a meter
You're
versus
exactly right.
okay. And then question about how we allocate the funds for a piece of equipment where we have deferred the purchase. So I mean, those funds would be stay in the equipment replacement fund, but will they be spoken for? Will they, will we leave them floating out there earmarked for a trench digger compactor, or will it just goes back into the equipment replacement fund? And let's say in an FY25 budget, it'll come back forward again and we'll need to spend that money. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Or if in the middle of FY24, all of a sudden we need that piece of equipment and we go and we buy it because we've already put those funds aside. In theory, they're encumbered or they're earmarked for that piece of equipment. I just didn't know if we were how that would work.
It's my understanding it would be the latter. The funds will stay within the equipment replacement fund, not earmarked for anything. in
Not earmarked.
particular.
Okay, thanks.
would say the only time there'd be a difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, is if it was a carryover. If we had budgeted something in this current fiscal year, we didn't buy it in the fiscal year for whatever reason, carry it over into fiscal year 24.
So you're not going to plan to carry over those pieces of equipment, or maybe we might or we may not.
The only one at this point that I was going to come to you with a carryover request is the trash truck, because we won't pay for it until we get it in October.
Understood. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. And thanks for answering all my questions during the week.
My pleasure. Any other questions?
Keep on trucking.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Next item on the agenda, are public hearings, public hearing in consideration of zoning ordinance amendment to amend the minimum lot width requirement for multifamily dwelling units. Invite Arnie. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening to you all. There is a request for a zoning text amendment for lot width requirements. If I could get you to look at page 3 of your packet, which is also, I believe, page 34 of your overall packet. It's the table for the lot width requirements. You should have 2 pages there. What's highlighted in red is really what's being proposed to be amended, sorry. And for the RM and RLC zoning districts, the proposal is for multifamily units to no longer be tied to a minimum lot width requirement that is tied to the number of units. We are a little bit special in that sense. We provided you with a short spreadsheet of other jurisdictions from this area, and you will notice that in the column, the 5th one over from the left, minimum lot width requirements, we are the only jurisdiction, at least in this particular area, that ties minimum lot width for multifamily to the number of units. So all the other ones have either no minimum lot width requirement or a minimum lot width requirement that's quote unquote a flat requirement. It is either 60 feet, 50 feet, or 100 feet. So we're trying to address what is an inconsistency between the minimum lot area, which will stay. So multifamily developments will continue to have a minimum lot area requirement, but we're trying to perhaps provide a minimum lot width that's a little bit more in keeping with what other folks have, and perhaps a little bit more reasonable than having one that ratchets up as the number of units increases. Planning Commission held a public hearing. They made a recommendation that the minimum lot width be reduced, or at least the portion stricken that ratchets up depending on the number of units, to strike that part in both the RM and RLC and substitute a 100-foot requirement for that. That was a unanimous recommendation. Also during the meeting, we provided you with minutes from the prior Planning Commission meeting. But we also had a couple of submittals during that meeting. So I believe on page 45 of your overall packet, Charles Rappold provided some comments. He did not speak at the meeting, but he provided some comments. And Tom Contos has 5 or 6 pages that he submitted as well. So those are also in your packet this evening. That's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Doesn't appear. Thank you, Arnie, for that briefing. And I'd like to move into the public hearing. And at this time, Jim, if you could check and see if anyone signed up. And while he's checking, is there anyone who would like to speak to this matter? Tom, come on up.
Hello, Tom Contos, 198. I'm sorry, getting my address in Menlo Park, 301 McLaughlin Street in Lexington. As Arnie said, I think that there is a pretty strong consensus that the lot requirements need to be reworked down to more realistic levels for the kind of larger multifamily developments that we're getting recently. I think the recommendation that's from the Planning Commission that you're considering tonight, it's not bad at all. In fact, you could make an argument that we don't need the lot width requirements at all. It's just that when you listen to the discussion that produced it, it was about 45-minute discussion. I think the basis of their proposal seems a lot more nuanced than it looks on your agenda. I think there's a lot of thinking behind it that needs to be kind of vetted. And so what I wanted to do is ask you tonight is to listen to the recording of that discussion, which begins about the 2 minute 45 second mark and continues to the 46 minute mark. It would have been really helpful to have the city attorney in those kind of discussions. I know that you know the county does that. Have an attorney at the planning commission for every meeting. But I think that if he could review that recording and maybe provide some of the guidance that the planning commissioners seem to be looking for, I think it would be really important before you get too far along this path. And in particular, to clarify what latitude they have in the CUP approval. There's a lot of discussion about that. And I'd also reference the Planning Commission March 10th of 2022 meeting audio 2440 to 2624, which is when the issue of these two of the density first came up, and just some discussion of lot widths and lot areas was held at that time. And then finally, I would consider maybe taking a different route when this kind of larger scale residential project comes along to focus on rezoning parcels into the RM rather than treating them as conditional uses in the RLC zone. And then adopting text amendments that are more tailored to the intermediate density projects. And I would ask that you not touch the existing requirements in the RLC zone until maybe we have a more appropriate approach to the low density multifamily that's more appropriate in some of those zones. I think like in Stanton, there are sort of two. There's an RM that's low density, and then there's an RM that's intermediate density, which is where Spotswood is going. And that's all. I really would just ask you to review that sound recording. It's quite interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for those remarks and insights and suggestions. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this matter for this public hearing? Hearing none, I would like to close the public hearing at 7:47 and ask for council's consideration and or discussion.
I'll just add a little context to some of this, and it is in your packet as well, but Planning Commission, while we were discussing this, if you look at the minimum lot area that is in your packet for some of the other localities, Lexington's is a much larger requirement. We start with, for multifamily housing, we start with 10,000 square feet and then increase it 1,500 square feet for each additional unit, which is more than the other localities. And looking through this, on the minimum lot width, we decided to take, again, looking at the other data, the most conservative, which was 100 feet. Because there was some discussion about, do you even need any? Because our neighboring localities, Buena Vista and Rockbridge County, don't have a minimum lot width, but we, at this point, are not interested in having what we call the pipe stem lots, where you don't really you only have a tiny little access to a street, and we didn't want to go that route yet, and that's something we might discuss later for infill. But for multifamily housing, we didn't feel like that type of infill was appropriate. So just to let you know kind of how we got to where we got.
Was there any discussion on how the existing ordinance came into, because I mean, we're
Right.
here because in theory, a mistake may have been made years ago
Right.
when we did the rewrite of the zoning ordinance.
No, we did discuss it
We
quite a
kinda Need
bit.
to acknowledge
Right.
that was
Right.
the first error of our ways, because we passed an ordinance some time ago that contradicted itself.
Right. We had a lot of theories on it, but we never came up with anything why it specifically was like that. I don't know, it's sort of somewhat, they were kind of using lot width to try to incorporate a density limit, and that should not be within that. If you want a density limit, it should be a separate number. Some places do have that and others don't, but you shouldn't mix it up like that. So yes, we didn't come up for a good reason why it was like that, but it's been like that for a while. And we don't get too many multifamily housing, so it hadn't really been an issue.
To your point, the 2.5 square miles that is our existence, and the lack of development that we've seen, it really hasn't been an issue and isn't a major factor of sorts. But one of the things, I guess, point out that wasn't obvious to me at first when I was reading this, thinking that the size of the lot wouldn't have any factor on the number of units, but you're still going to be limited by height.
Right.
So it's not like you can have a 20-story facility if you have almost 0 lot lines or something of that nature. There's still restrictions as to the size and scope of any project that would take place.
Exactly. And like when we talked about the PDUs, the
UDs.
yeah, with mixed use, that was the same issue we discussed. We didn't put in a density number because you are already limited by how high you can go. And parking for our small lots, parking is going to be your limiting factor in most cases anyway.
Right.
So, you do have some built-in density limits.
Mr. Alligood.
I just want to suggest that it would be, in my opinion, a good idea to have the city attorney take a look at what Mr. Contos suggested for us to be a bit better informed on what happened in the past versus what's being proposed currently, and have his opinion, his learned opinion after his review prior to us taking a position.
I'd agree with that. I think it never hurts to take all the time necessary to make sure that you have everything in place. We could ask the city attorney, do you think you would need further time to review this?
Well, I think it's two different things. I think reviewing it for the purposes of making sure that everything going on at the planning commission is handled appropriately and also making sure that we understand the issues is one thing, but I don't think that changes the fact that we presently have the discrepancy with regard to the lot width issue. I don't know that that would necessitate holding off on taking action tonight necessarily.
Okay, that's fair.
But I still think there could be merit in reviewing the audio and coming back and opining whether there's anything that we need to factor in future decision making and future processes.
Yeah.
And
That's just that's my read on it without having listened to it, of course.
and I don't want to put words in Mr. Contos's mouth, but part of the discussion was the intention is not for these to be either or. When you look at the requirements, you either meet the lot area or you meet the width requirement. You're supposed to meet all of them. But where we got into an issue was it was a CUP, so we had a little more latitude and we had 2 conflicting parameters. So there was some discussion about whether you're supposed to meet all these criteria or if it's one or the other. And we agreed it is meant to be, you're supposed to meet all these criteria.
And that's an area where, back to Mr. Contos's point, listening to the recording would be insightful to hear about the discussion about the conditional use permit and what is and is not allowed there. And then that'll allow me to come back and if I need to make some comments.
Perhaps if it pleases council to consider this evening, but in the motion, also direct the city attorney to review that and come back with analysis from his review.
Sounds good.
I don't get to make motions though.
Well, we haven't made a motion yet.
Correct.
Did you officially close the public hearing? Because if the public hearing was left open,
Yeah. I believe I closed it at 7:47.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll make a motion. Then I move to approve ZOA 2023-02 to amend Article 4, Section 6, lot requirements such that the minimum lot width requirement for multifamily dwelling units in the RM and RLC zoning districts is 100 feet. And also that the city attorney review the last planning commission meeting discussions.
Specifically, the suggestion of Mr. Contos.
Yes.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Further discussion. I'll just say I appreciate planning, taking the time and thoughtful time to consider this and work to come up with better circumstance for us and for folks. I think every time that we can give entrepreneurs or developers better guidance on how to operate in our city, we're doing our job to make it more appropriate a positive environment for productivity and progress in our community. With that, I'd like to request a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Arnie, thank you for bringing that forward. And Mr. Contos, thank you for your insights. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the minutes. They were included in your packet, the May 4 City Council regular meeting. Unless, yes, sir. Mr.
Like just
Betts.
one small amendment. I'd like to clarify that the reason I chose to recuse myself was based on the closing, the fact that the firm was handling the closing specifically rather than any other factors.
Janie's got it.
That's a helpful amendment, I think.
Yes. With that modification, is there any objection to approving the minutes? Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved. Next items are citizen remarks and comments. Thank you, sir. And we always invite folks to come and address council on topics that are not on the agenda or may be on the agenda. And we ask that you direct your comments to council. Stand up to the podium and state your name and address for the record. We ask that you be brief, state your position and provide facts. Provide written statements and or supporting materials to the clerk for distribution to the council and the mayor, manager. Debate is prohibited, and we ask that you speak clearly as we want to hear what you have to say. And I'll call on Marilyn Shaner Berkins as our first or the individual who signed up to speak tonight. Marilyn, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for having me here, and thank you, Council, for allowing public comment and for listening. I'm disappointed when I read about the memorial that the council approved to be placed at Jordan's Point. I don't think placing that at Jordan's Point makes the world a better place. I've been a military spouse. My brother served in the armed forces. My father stayed warm in foxholes, sadly enough, smoking cigarettes to stay warm in World War II. My grandfather was a veteran of World War I, and we've all been Lexington residents, Rockbridge County residents for 7 generations. So that said, I don't like a problem without maybe a feasible solution. Where, if you want a memorial such as this, is a better place to put it than Jordan's Point? Well, perhaps across the way from the Oak Grove Cemetery. It could be perhaps incorporated into that development that's being prepared at this point. I guess it's still being prepared. And perhaps the memorial could face the street and face Oak Grove. So in the Presbyterian kind of a way, the veterans can talk to each other. And I say that with humor, but I also say that with heart. Another location could be perhaps a collaboration with the hospital. Somewhere on their grounds, that memorial could be placed. And again, perhaps close enough that it could be facing the Oak Grove Cemetery. And again, so that our veterans can talk to each other. A third location, I drove recently to Evergreen Cemetery, and I don't know the plan for the cemetery, but perhaps that memorial could be incorporated into such a plan. And perhaps it could even face Route 11. So when people drive past on 11, they could see it, and they might be drawn in to the cemetery. They might be drawn into Lexington. And either of those three any of those three locations might bring people into downtown to spend some money. So you'd be supporting your merchants as well. And I hope that's something that you can still consider. Thank you.
Marilyn, thanks for being with us and sharing your insights and family history.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Tom. I don't know your injury, but I hope it's short-lived.
Tom Contos, 301 McLaughlin Street. I also want to comment on the memorial, and not to make a suggestion for moving it or anything, but just to make sure everybody understands that the entire park is, I think, within the 100-year floodplain. Maybe a little bit behind the steward's houses in the, or the houses in the 500-year floodplain. But most of that meadow is within the regulatory floodway. So in that zone, I think it's understood that you can't put anything, storage for soccer balls or anything should go in there. However, in the area where we have the existing structures, the kiosk and the bathrooms, that's in the flood fringe, which is still floods, but it's more like standing water, and you can go through a process and you can develop in there. But just to be aware, as you locate it, if that's where you end up locating it, that room is very limited in that flood fringe, and that you won't be able in the future to put anything of any sort into the regulatory floodway. It's all the AE zone on the map, but it's divided into different districts. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Anything? Arthur. Please come join us. If you could state your name and address for the record. Thanks for being here.
Arthur Bartenstein. I live at 614 Stonewall Street. I was involved with the initial ad hoc committee that provided the vision for Jordan's Point Park. At one point, it was the city's water treatment plant, and 20-some years ago, I was actually privileged to work with Carlton Abbott on developing a master plan for the park. And that report, what I would call the inaugural master plan for the park, had these three goals. One, well, there were more goals, but these are related to this particular question. To interpret the cultural and natural landscape in a way that honors the preservation goals of the park. Two, to protect, preserve, and conserve the historic and natural resources of the site. And three here, to provide open space for passive recreation and for special wants as they may be consistent with the preservation goals of the park. That's something I just wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur, and thanks for being with us this evening. It's always good to look back at the foundational elements as we look to the future. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Mary Ellen.
Good evening. Good evening, council. I'm Mary Ellen Cook. I live at 4 North Lewis Street here in Lexington. Today, I asked the city for a copy of Jordan's Point master plan. I was surprised we even had one. And when the conversation came up, I guess it was on sometime in the end of April, about putting the military monument on Jordan's Point. I was surprised the decision was made so quickly that night without even possibly someone asking if there was a master plan. There is the topic of being in the floodplain or not. It's been written in the newspaper that it is in the floodplain. The newspaper, the person who wrote this from the Historic Lexington Foundation said, first, Jordan's Point Park is susceptible to severe flooding, and it falls within the FEMA designated flood hazard zone. Both the city's comprehensive plan and building codes discourage physical structures in flood zones. We've just heard that same point made. I went out and walked the area today. With this floodplain map in hand, trying to figure out where the actual lines were and were not. And they put a big, FEMA puts a big delineation of floodplain around the stream gone through there. Woods Creek has a big, and then the lower portion of the park is noted on this map. But the place where they want them, did you hit the 2 minute?
Not yet.
Okay. The place where they've asked to put the memorial seems to be outside that designation called FEMA floodway zone. But even though it says floodway, it doesn't mean that adjacent zones within the area would not flood. So we can go back to, but what I found hard to understand on this map is that Miller's home, where we know did not flood during the 1985 flood, is in the same designation as that strip of land below it. So I would say many years ago, it had a lot of structures on it. Presently, it doesn't. I'm not going to go by anyone's maps at this point. I'm going to say it's floodplain. Let's leave it as floodplain and find another pleasant place to put the memorial. I am not against the memorial. Okay?
Very good. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you for being with us, and thanks for reviewing the flood map.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Yes, ma'am. Miss B, come join us.
On the memorial. I wish to speak on where I was looking at this, and I apologize for not being here in time to sign up to speak. But when I looked at this about the 201 North Randolph Street house, and it states that no action required. What does that mean?
Ms. Johnson, for the public comment period, we tend to listen to what residents have to say and refer any issues to the city manager for follow-up. I know that the city manager plans to, under that, there's no action anticipated, but the city manager does have a report to update council and the community on his efforts and from his meetings with the owners of 201 North Randolph. But it's not really within our purview. Councilman Ziegler asked that this just have a placeholder on our agenda so that we can keep it in the forefront. But there's no action for council. Staff will be taking any action as far as enforcement and things of that nature to have the family that owns the property to bring it into compliance with the city's code. Does that make sense?
Not really. Because I'm thinking then we're right back where we started from, with no action being done.
The action is not going to be taken by this city council. We're not going to vote on something under that agenda item. That's where no action by this city council tonight will occur. However, it's on the agenda for the city manager to share any updates that have happened in the last couple of weeks. He might share with us that the city is taking some actions. through our zoning ordinance. However, this council here, no action. We will not be making a motion. We will not be voting. So that's what it's referring to, that we will not take any action as a body tonight.
Okay, then I will be following up with city manager.
Yeah.
And I have one other statement, that it was said in the last, when I reported last meeting, that I thank the owners of that property down. I don't know what I was supposed to thank her for. Okay, so the streets, yes, we are thankful that the streets were done, but why am I going to thank her? Because they chose to park there for it to have the streets done. I'm not understanding that.
Ms. Johnson, I was the one that made that comment, and publicly I'll affirm again, that landowner didn't have to allow the contractor to utilize that as a laydown area for the construction project, and it would have extended the time and the costs associated with it. So I see the Clarks as being reasonable neighbors. They have owned the property for approximately 2 years, and the first year or so, their property was used as the laydown area and parking for all the construction. But more importantly, I personally thank you and all the neighborhood for being patient while we tore up the streets, created mayhem, and made a mess while we replaced the water and sewer lines. And now we have those accomplished. Now it's time for the Clarks to do something with that property. And I can assure you that council is very focused on supporting the city manager with the ordinances and the policies that we have as a community, so that all neighbors comply with the appropriate ordinances. And to take it a step further, where Mr. Ziegler said this council is not planning to take any action, our job is to set policy and procedure. We have policies for nuisance properties, folks that don't mow their grass, or a structure that has become unsafe. And the city manager and the staff are charged with following those policies. We already have the policies in place, so there's no additional action for city council to take, other than directing the city manager to work with you and to work with the approximately 200 people, I believe, that signed the petition, having a problem with that property and making some progress towards getting it to be a safe residence there.
Okay, I understand that. I noticed you used the word nuisance. That is more than a nuisance to us.
Yes, ma'am.
And one other thing now, off of that, over at the playground. No. Richardson Park. It looks very nice, and the equipment that's over there for the kids to use. But I wish you would go back and look at the swings. They are much too high for little kids. If you could please lower them down some. That would be appreciated, because I noticed little children over there, 3 and 4s, that was trying to get on the swings, and they couldn't get up there. They weren't tall enough. So if you could please do some attention to that, that would be appreciated. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Appreciate you being with us and sharing your insights. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Hearing none, I'd like to close the public comments at 8:13 and move on to the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Have a motion is second, roll call vote. Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Under unfinished business, the 10.1, the Horse Center, and 10.2, 201 North Randolph Street. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to report that I did sit down and talk with the Clarks, Miss Connie and Miss Shy Clark. did note to them that their property is in violation of city and state code, and that with a complaint made by a number of the neighbors, staff and I would be enforcing that code and they would receive a letter of violation. I wanted to sit down with them as a courtesy to explain fully why we would be taking these actions, and they will receive a letter of violation next week. I sat down with them earlier this week, met with the building inspector and went over the violations, did provide a copy of that to the clerks so they understood again why we were taking the actions that we will be taking. So under our city code, of course, they are able to come up with a plan or a response to the violation as per code. And I did inform them that, they shouldn't expect any delay. They need to make a decision. They're either going to make improvements there or make some changes there, develop the property, or if they're not going to be able to develop that, to, just be upfront with us. Don't make unnecessary delays part of the issue we're dealing with. And it was a very good, positive, productive discussion. They freely admitted that at this juncture, it didn't appear they were going to be able to renovate the home. They've been having some problems finding contractors, getting estimates for the work they needed done. And the last time they spoke with somebody very recently, the price was over $1 million to renovate the home, and they freely admitted they just couldn't do that. So they're looking at the options that are available to them. I think one of them is if they found a buyer, they'd be willing to sell. But they do understand very clearly they're going to have to make some improvements to that property that from a city code standpoint, we will enforce the code. I did mention the appeals rights they have. They do have appeals rights, of course. There's also a possibility, of course, that the Architectural Review Board may take up the case and deny a permit for tearing the structure down, demolition. But just went through all those procedural issues that they will be facing, and that indicating that within 60 days, we either had a plan in hand, they're taking action, or they would be, we would take enforcement actions. So they're well informed, and it was a good, positive conversation again. So as the city council knows, and so Ms. Johnson knows, it's obviously not in your hands. Staff and I will enforce city code and legally take the steps that we need to take and should take to benefit and protect the citizens.
Members of council have any questions? Mr. Alligood.
Should there be a buyer for the 201 Randolph Street, what would that do to the process in terms of making the corrections, the rehabilitation to the property? What would happen? Would that stop the clock, or
should there be a
start-
buyer?
Yes.
We have served them notice the day they purchased it that they're in violation. The violation doesn't stop because there's a new owner. They'd be in violation the day they purchased it. And I'd have a conversation as soon as I could with the new owner, indicating we'd be enforcing city code.
So the violation goes with the property and not the owner.
Yes, it's certainly the case, and any owner that owns it is now responsible for that property and the violation.
To be specific, if you send a violation on June 1st and they have 60 days to make a correction or be fined or anything else, they close in 45 days. The new owner doesn't have 15 days. The new owner will have 60 days from date of purchase.
That is correct, but they're still in violation.
Right. Just want to be clear. It's not the clock is ticking. It does have a reset.
Always ticking, but yes, as a new owner, you have 60 days.
Well, and as I've lobbied from my position originally on council and as mayor, I think it's just really important for neighbors to talk to one another and understand what's going on. Sometimes folks need help with things going on or need some time as they I remember an awning at a business downtown. It had been approved, funded. They just couldn't get the person to come and install the awning. The old awning was flapping in the wind in March with all the winds. It was terrible, and worried that it might fall on someone. And by asking, instead of filing a complaint, found out the circumstance, and that inspired the owner to work a little bit harder to find someone else to install it and get it accomplished. So working towards that solution, but certainly the house in its current state is a hazard and dangerous, and the clerks are well aware, and we'll receive notice in the coming week, I believe. Anything else to report on 201 North Randolph Street? Next item, reports and communications, the Blue Ridge Resource Authority, no report. Main Street, Lexington, I'm not aware that Mr. Smith had one for anyone to deliver. Planning Commission, Ms. Strawn.
Planning Commission met on Thursday, May 11th, and we welcomed Gladys Hopkins to the Planning Commission. And then we revisited the amendment to the lot width requirements that we just approved. And as you know, we approved those again. We also unanimously approved amendments to the bylaws of the Planning Commission to conform the conflict of interest section with the state code. And we added language defining the role of the Planning Commission, but not expanding the role. And this will come before council, I believe, at our next meeting. And we continued our discussion on accessory dwelling units. That's all I have unless there's any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions about planning? Remind me, we have a full house currently, but we have two seats that are expiring in June.
July, I think, is
Expiring here shortly.
right.
And so we'll have two vacancies. So folks that are interested, there'll be two seats to fill.
Yes, exactly. And I was glad to see the city ad in the paper last couple of weeks. So that was helpful. Good start.
Keep your eye out. You may see it in another periodical that comes out monthly.
Oh, good. Look for that in the June edition.
Exactly. Regional Tourism Board, Mr. Betts.
It's my understanding that USA BMX has renewed their contract for 1 year. The event will occur the first weekend of February next year. There was $15,500 of awards given out during the tourism sponsorship round 5 of awards. The events are scheduled to occur between July and December 2023. Applicant notification occurs Friday, May 19th, and a press release will follow. I was hoping to give you all some more information about the awards, but I don't want to spoil it. So that will be reported on next meeting.
Terrific. Any questions? Certainly been a busy time, and I encourage everyone to mark the first weekend in February on their calendar. If you've never been to the BMX event, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And the transformation of the Horse Center is remarkable. So make your plans. Rockbridge Area Recreation Organization.
No report.
Threshold
No report.
and Maury Service Authority.
A little report. The MSA Mars Service Authority Board didn't meet yet. The planned meeting, regular meeting is next Tuesday at 5 o'clock in this very room. And that's the end of the report.
Terrific. And been advised that Ned Reister will be moving soon, who serves on the Maury Service Authority for the city of Lexington. So if there's anyone that has an interest in the Maury Service Authority and serving on that board, would love to be aware of that, as Ned ends a long run serving on that. I think retirement at VMI has liberated him.
It's one of our most important appointments. And so hopefully the public takes that and to join Mr. Alligood and the rest of the MSA, because the work that they do, again, I think we tried to say this at the last meeting, but in total, that the MSA will take on projects that make everything that we've done for the last 20 or 30 years in the city of Lexington like nothing. I mean, it's huge what the MSA is undertaking. So we need some good folks to come forward.
Next on the agenda, housing report. Ms. Alexander, I'll let you lead the show.
All right, thank you. The city manager and Councilman Betts and I went to Richmond on Friday to attend a Virginia First Cities annual meeting, and their topic of the day was about housing. They talked about developable land, solutions that cities may have, talked about affordable mixed use, and about zoning. And it was pretty ironic that we made some decisions this evening, and We had just been talking about the same thing all day Friday. The land challenge that communities have has to do with being able to produce housing as infill, to fill in spaces that are vacant. Also, they said that we should be meeting with the development community quarterly. But keep in mind that their audience was made up mostly of people who were on city councils in larger municipalities. So with us being a very small one, some of this really didn't apply, but the overall message definitely points the finger at us. They talked about issues in regard to having land to develop, and some of the issues being parking, density, minimum lot size. I think all of those terms ring a bell here. They talked about possible solutions, and they had a panel of people from the housing industry who provided their expertise from their various places of employment. They talked about the maximum land available and making use of that for multifamily development rather than single family, that you get basically the biggest bang for your size of land and your financing with multifamily rather than single family. They said that localities may need to rezone some particular parts of their city to multifamily for better use of the land. Preservation of the stock, looking at the current stock and preserving it for housing. Looking at housing across the spectrum. This was one that was of interest to me, because they talked about diverse housing, that not every locality needs to just focus on multifamily housing or not focus on just affordable housing, but every locality needs many types of housing that they should be willing to consider, because every type of housing is needed at this juncture. Some properties are landlocked, and they talked about possible solutions for that. Could be brought back to the locality to determine how to use land that's landlocked and how to access it. To start thinking creatively, think outside of the box to make things happen, rather than continuing to just drive by every day and not do anything. They said localities need more by right development and work to bring in the public into the fold of supporting rezoning various areas. Talked about rewriting of the zoning ordinance for the right zoning to accommodate housing, in addition to including affordable housing especially. They talked about the density. Did you have any idea what was specific to that in regard to the density?
I think part of it had to do with the lot sizes, and also, they talked about the parking, essentially having large parking lots where there was no density at all, because they just weren't in use. So just, I think they were kind of getting that efficient use of land and maximizing the use of land within your city's borders.
Didn't they talk about how there are large parking lots, like for instance, for example, Walmart parking lot, and if there's housing next to it, then work out partnerships in regard
Absolutely.
to access the spaces
And they showed a statistic how much unused parking was, say in Richmond. You know, there's way more parking than there needed to be. And one of the things that was interesting that actually somebody from another locality talked about was how there's a lot of pressure on the middle part of the market in housing in cities, because people will want to move up to houses that have more space, and then people will want to move downsize from larger housing. So there's a lot of pressure on the average price homes in some localities. They were talking, somebody talked about a study done in their locality, so I found that to be interesting.
Some of that can apply to this area. Some localities have even required developers to put in a certain percentage of units in whatever they develop as affordable housing. That there would be a requirement built into the plan for that housing, that every developer would need to have a percentage devoted to affordable housing. They said that the IDA attracts development by way of performance grants. Talked about working with our legislature, more guidelines were put in place by the legislature about 2 years ago, and we could be working towards some of those incentives that they put in place. They talked again about zoning. They talked about zoning almost all day, just back and forth. And emphasizing getting out of this mold of this is all that we can do that we already have in place. To start thinking about modular homes, talk about manufactured homes. Both of those reduce the cost of home ownership, especially for people starting out and looking for a home. They said being stick built, it's outdated. And this is from a lobbyist who was with the Home Builders Association of Virginia. He said it takes 5 weeks to build modular manufactured to getting it all ready, versus a stick-built home, which can take 6 to 8 months. So just the time alone saves the new homeowner lots of money. They talked about the popularity of tiny homes, and that if you do tiny homes, that the recommendation would be that it is a mixed income village and absolutely allow some subsidized opportunities, but the tiny homes should be in a development all of its own, not a tiny house all over the city in different places, but all of them together in their own little community. Anything else to add?
And they also talk some about tax credits and about having discussions with the development community.
Jim, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Okay. The buzzword of the day was NIMBY. NIMBY means not in my backyard, which is always a problem when you're talking about housing of any kind, that hopefully localities will start thinking that it could be in their backyard.
And I raised the point at the conference, and some of the folks on the panel agreed with me that housing is interconnected. So if there aren't places that people can buy their first home and build equity, then that impacts, can they buy that homeowner's house that wants to sell and downsize later. So it's really important to think about holistically how our housing decisions impact the community at large when we're making good policy.
Okay, Nick, Marilyn, thank you for the report, and thank you for enriching your knowledge and representing our community at that meeting in Richmond. I know you represent us well, and it's always, I find when I go to different VML or Virginia First City sponsored events, I always come away with some greater knowledge and frequently a new friendship from someone else around the state. And through that collaboration, it always pays dividends. So thank you all for investing that time and effort. Well, you'll see it reflected in your paycheck. For my report, I have a couple of items. One, when we were looking at appointments at the last meeting for McKinley Williams for the library board, I indicated that it was a 5-year term, but I was misread, and his term should be from July 1, 2023 to June 30, 2027. And with the attorney's guidance, and I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, should we have another vote or just the modification of the date? The fair. Very good. We originally approved for a 5-year term, which was not appropriate. It's a 4-year term by our code, I believe, and an ordinance. And I would ask for your all's consideration to appoint McKinley Williams to the library board for a 4-year term ending June 30, 2027.
I make a motion to appoint Reverend McKinley Williams to the library board effective July 1 for a 4-year term till June 30, 2027.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Couple other items. First, offer congratulations to General Wins on the conclusion of a great school year. I had the opportunity to attend VMI graduation earlier this week, and I've shared with everyone that I've had the opportunity that after hearing the valedictorian and the president of the class speak, my faith in the future is renewed. The men and women graduating from VMI are of terrific character, competence, and just very impressive. So very, very excited about the future, and congratulations to all of them. And next week, of course, I look forward to congratulating President Dudley on getting another class of leaders out of Washington and Lee in their graduation. And I would also, as we've gone through different events and like the dark sky that we talked about at our last meeting, I encourage all of our community to be a local tourist. Go out and look at our community as a tourist for the first time. Think about and look at it, not just things that you're passing by. Folks have not visited University Chapel, the grounds at VMI, Natural Bridge State Park, just to name a few. There's so many things. I encourage you to go down to our visitor center and just become acquainted and maybe set up a few things that you haven't done or thought about since you went in high school, or maybe when you were passing through looking at Lexington. We've got a lot to offer and encourage you to go out and sample those. And lastly, in the spirit of acknowledging and celebrating public works, it was heartwarming to see I'll say the beehive around town, painting the yellow lines in particular, and then also some other improvements with on steps, the railings being painted that had fallen into a little bit of neglect, but very grateful for the folks that are in our public works doing their good work each and every day. And with that, I'd like to call on the city manager to offer his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While we don't have any really large utility projects this year, we still do have one important project, and that's a water line replacement on East Denny Circle. We recently had bids for that project, and they came in at $629,232. Randy Hofstetter is going to do that work. We'd budgeted $800,000 for it, so it's a little less than we budgeted, which is welcome news, of course. And we're working closely with Washington and Lee staff to be sure that we can have a smooth project and try and do road closures that reduce the time of the project and the cost of the project. So it's positive at this juncture, but it's got a long way to go. Planning and development has seen a continuing robust year at the end of April. Administrative development and enforcement activities are all up as compared to last year. And from a financial standpoint, fees collected are $87,491 in the current year as opposed to $46,995 last year. And the value of building improvements over the same period increased from $6,892,179 to $11,057,048 in the current year. So big increase there in the value of construction. We have a new registrar, or soon will. The Board of Elections hired the current assistant registrar, Francina Jones, to be the new registrar after the retirement of Jackie Harris, who will be retiring at the end of June. A few tidbits from the fire department. A shout out to one of our volunteers, Michael Kellner. He graduated from Blue Ridge Community College with a National Registry Paramedic certification and degree. And Mr. Kellner has been an active member of LFD for over 4 years and has been a great asset to our community as he steadily increased his training and education, which directly impacts and supports our community. The department is hosting the regional driver pump operator course at the station. The course is being led by volunteer Captain Brian Smith, and this is a state certified course teaching firefighters about driving and pump operations, just as it sounds. B Shift completed the pediatric advanced life support called PALS training, and daily driver training continues on Tower 9, and that's our new ladder truck. You have to be certified to drive that truck, and several department members are nearing completion of their training. 2 members of the department from each shift must be fully trained before the truck can be brought into service, and the chief believes that'll be done within the next 2 to 4 weeks. So it's not a simple matter of operating a truck of that nature. Some notes from the police department. In the last 2 weeks, the police department did really well in the area of grants, receiving a total of $214,214 in grants. The Mountain Unit received a $5,000 grant from both the USA Equestrian Trust and the National Kappa Alpha Fraternity. $157,000 was received from the Department of Criminal Justice Services and will be used for departmental equipment, including 2 new patrol vehicles. The school resource officer grant for $47,217 was received, and this grant and the additional $30,687 to fully fund the position are in the approved fiscal year 24 budget. 26 hours of foot patrol were logged in the community last week, and the mayor and I were both with the chief at the Spirit of the Blue Ride, where cyclists came through last Wednesday on their way to Washington, D.C. And this event involves cyclists from all over the country who ride to honor fallen law enforcement personnel and raise funds for surviving family members. About 40 riders were present, and the police department provided lunch and water. The lunch was a courtesy of Washington Lee, and a brief recognition of their efforts was provided by the mayor and Chief Green. Corporal Hartbarger attended crisis intervention training, and the chief's advisory board met and discussed final preparation for the police department's summer camp that'll happen later in the summer. And that is my report, Mr. Mayor. Happy to answer any questions from City Council.
Very good. Members of council have any questions regarding that report? Very good. Very good. That being the case, call on city attorney.
I do not have a report this evening, Mr. Mayor, but happy to answer any questions anyone may have, things we will discuss tonight or otherwise.
Very good. Members of council have any questions for the city attorney? Hearing none, thank you. Under new business, again, we scratched the approval of the agreement for the establishing a regional human services center, and that will come back before council on June 1st. And we added a presentation or information by Mr. Alligood on flowers and right of way. Mr. Alligood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over the years, one of the things that my wife and I have attempted to do is plant wildflowers across the street on city property from where we live on Cavalry Road. And we've had varying degrees of success. But the most successful thing has been the city right-of-way crew mowing them down. And what even when they were in full bloom. And what I would like to suggest is that a slight modification of the right-of-way crew's mowing protocol. And I think that would help us a good deal in that should there be nice blooming flowers to mow around them. just let them grow on their own. And in the case of tall grass, go ahead and cut that as you would usually do. But in terms of beautifying the city, not only in the stretch across from where I live, but maybe there are other right-of-way areas in the city that people, residents might take an interest in growing wildflowers there as well. I just want to offer the possibility that the city could cooperate with that, and it would beautify the city as opposed to just mowing everything off. Now, the mowing protocol over the past years has been irregular at best. And the flowers that we've attempted to grow have grown, but even being irregular, they ultimately got cut. And right now, the Dames rockets, for those of you who know about Dames rockets, are in full bloom, and they're roughly 3 feet high. And our mowing protocol in the past has been 12 inches. Well, they don't bloom at 12 inches. And maybe just a slight modification, and making our team, which I think overall attempts to do a very good job, aware, and it would be an easy matter, I think, to steer the tractor around the flowers rather than go straight over them. And that's the essence of my report, is just making an awareness, a statement of awareness, and asking for cooperation from the city to leave blooming flowers alone on city right of way. And I guess I would ask for the city manager's comment on how to proceed.
Very good. And also ask for council's response to your request, if any.
I guess kind of, I would just ask, would there be a process going forward for private citizens to apply to the city to plant things on city property so that we could wrap our minds around? Is that what you're advocating for? Would all city property be available to private citizens to plant things on?
Blooming flowers, yes. I'm thinking of things like that. I'm not talking about trees and grasses and nuisance weeds. There are certain weeds, like I wouldn't advocate planting thistles, even though they have a beautiful flower.
What if there were like designated areas where folks could do this on city property versus just kind of anywhere on city property? Like if you could apply, like David's suggestion to apply to say, hey, we'd like this area to be an area of on city property that we can, as citizens, plant like flowers, or versus if you do it everywhere, it might get hard to mow around them because then you won't have like a clear path to mow.
I would interject by saying, I think the question to council is not how to implement I don't think Mr. Alligan's thought about anything except Calvary and the flowers that he and his wife have planted. Anytime that there's an issue that we want to direct staff, we of course go into our planning and we come up with an agenda of items that are important that we have as priorities for the city, for staff and the city manager to work on. We get one-offs occasionally as well. But one member of council can't direct the city manager to implement a program or policy. So I think Mr. Alligood's request is, would council support directing the city manager to perhaps bring back to council some idea, working with public works, best practices, and what have you, for us to consider or for the city to implement for those cultivating city property, unauthorized cultivation of city property. I know that my own personal circumstance, looking at flowers, in my youth, I worked for Cousin Betty, and she asked me to go weed a flower bed. And sadly, I didn't know the difference between a weed and a flower. And I got in a lot of trouble with Cousin Betty because I pulled the flowers. I don't know what training we ask of our public works folks or our mowers, but it can get dicey. One person's flower, the thistle may be beautiful. I know you're not advocating for thistles to be planted. The flip side may be for the city manager to come up with a plan, which my brother in Germany has embraced. He's responsible for a section of his village. and plants trees and flowers, and that's his place. It's the Friedman plot of sorts that gets tended to and taken care of. So the city doesn't have to mow it. He takes care of it and has actually pays to have the ability to take care of that piece of land. So those are just a couple of random peculiar thoughts. But the question is, if council or the majority of council would support directing staff to look at Mr. Alligood's idea and see about an implementation.
I guess I have a little concern. I love wildflowers as well. 3 feet that is tall for growth. You start to limit visibility, especially if you're coming around a corner, and you provide an environment for animals to hide in it. But more importantly, what I'm concerned with is we had a work session where we planned out the city's agenda calendar for the year, and now we're kind of reprioritizing it and asking to have staff time spent on this at this point. And that's my biggest concern. I do not see this as a priority where I want to reorganize staff's to-do list or priorities at this point. I think it's something we can bring up as we develop priorities for next year, but I don't see this as an emergency or something I'd like to shift priorities for.
I don't see it as an emergency at all. So I agree with you on that. The particular property across the street from me is a sloped land. There's no view shed for drivers there at all. It's an out of the way place. One year I came back and the city had taken upon itself to herbicide that entire strip of land. And it still hasn't 100% recovered, but it's largely recovered. And the idea of planting beautiful flowers and having them bloom with no effort or cost on the part of the city, I think is appealing. And prioritizing, it's not about prioritizing or reprioritizing. It's just leaving the flowers alone to grow.
But I think what you're saying is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're focused on Calvary. And I would hate.
That's the project, yes.
Exactly. And I would hate for the public to think that they don't have the opportunity to plant flowers on public property, but only a city councilman does. And therefore you're directing public works on how to mow on property that is not yours because you've done something on public property. It just doesn't
beautified the property.
It just doesn't sit right with me. And so therefore, if we were to go down that path, it would be staff time, because we would have to come up with a policy with public input on all of the public property and how you get access to the big public property in Fairwinds, and have at her what you get to plant in Fairwinds, what you get to plant elsewhere. And I'm also like Leslie, we had about 20 some things that came out of our retreat that we wanted staff to work on, and public access to private access. You know, you're as a private citizen, not a councilman, a private citizen, to have access to public property to plant flowers and then direct city workers on how to maintain your flowers. I'm not ready to ask city staff on how to undertake that. So I can't support that.
I think with everything that we have on our plate, especially in the city manager's office and with staff, I don't see us spending a lot of time discussing this and making plans. But I understand where he's coming from. But I also want to say that all the land that's in front of my house, it's been difficult to even get it mowed until the city finally started realizing that it's city and not private, and they started mowing it. And I don't want to see them stop because I don't like snakes. So I think it depends on the eye of the beholder as to what you want. And when you start setting guidelines for something like this, your neighbors would have to give input. Would they want to see that growth or not? And I don't know if we would get that kind of agreement. I mean, how many people would have to agree? And I think it's just a lot of time that would need to be taken to make something like this happen. And I don't know how to manage this to accommodate city councilman's request. But I just think it's time consumption and it's not part of our list of priorities. I think we have a pretty heavy plate of really crucial matters that need to be addressed, and I don't want to see staff time spent on that right now, or maybe something we can come back to later.
Mr. Betts, any comments? It's okay if you don't.
I don't have any comments at this
I
time.
would just tell you that unlike housing, this is a classic case of in my backyard. But
Across the street. Across the street.
Backyard. I want it in your backyard.
right.
Across-
Very good. Well, thank you for bringing that forward, and thank you for the healthy discussion on the potential of mowing schedules. But again, I remind council and myself, as well as staff, whenever we have items that we find of interest, to bring them forward to all of council to consider, or talk to your peers and find their position. And if they support you, bring it forward in the public. But none of us have the authority or authorization to direct city staff. It's only as a group sitting together as council with 4 or more votes. With that, I'm not aware of any other business to come before us in the open. We do have a closed meeting. The concept here is to be briefed by the city manager on details relative to the property we own at 626 Waddell Street. And then also for council to excuse the city manager and review information regarding his annual performance and evaluation. I do not anticipate that we'll be taking any action when we come back from closed session other than to adjourn the meeting. And with that, I'd invite Vice Mayor Alexander to take us into closed session.
I move that Lexington City Council convene in a closed meeting pursuant to section 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing the disposition of publicly held real property located at 626 Waddell Street, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the city's bargaining position or negotiating strategy pursuant to section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing the annual performance evaluation of the city manager.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sigler. I have a motion and a second. Need a roll call vote. Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Sigler,
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
And I vote aye. We are now going into a closed meeting. Thank you.
Are we back yet?
In America,
Yes.
they're back on,
In Dulles?
At Dulles.
Yeah, Rob just got back.
and it becomes that they're having